Welcome to Moto Trek. I'm Dusty Wessels, professional motorcycle instructor with West 38 Moto. We know we can steer the motorcycle using the handlebars in the front wheel. Did you know you can also steer the motorcycle using the rear wheel with the throttle and the rear brake? Steering with the rear wheel means you're using the rear wheel to steer the bike and change directions quickly when you're out on the trail. You're utilizing the throttle and the rear brake with very effective inputs and very timely inputs. So why would we use the rear wheel to steer the bike? Honestly, it's mostly camera worthy. However, you're getting really good control of your motorcycle. You're using your influence to move this bike under power or while you're braking. That's a really good thing to understand on your bike. There are two effective ways to steer the motorcycle using the rear wheel: throttle input and rear brake input. Using throttle input while braking traction, called a power slide, makes you look great on camera, but not a very practical way to steer with the rear. So when I teach this maneuver, I teach it in my intermediate or advanced classes. We teach it by starting out with finding a low traction environment. The road surface needs to be consistently low traction. Hard-packed dirt with marble or pea-sized rocks, wide enough so two vehicles could pass, and a bailout point. The first step is to be comfortable initiating a turn. This is different than cornering at speed. We're not using our weight to shift all the way outside. We're not cornering slow, we're not cornering long, and we're not cornering sharp. These are subtle movements. Turn initiation is basically, if I'm going to take a right turn, I'm going to push on the handlebar and I'm going to put pressure and push on the inside peg. I only need to push so much so that I start to lean the motorcycle. As soon as the motorcycle starts to lean, the contact patch on the tire decreases, which allows the rear wheel to spin easier. Only a small amount of handlebar influence is required when steering. We don't want to go too far. Next, the rider needs to be comfortable with braking traction with the rear wheel. I teach my students to do this in a straight line. Standing up, weight forward, high RPMs in first gear, blip the throttle until the wheel breaks traction. Once the rider is comfortable with turn initiation and breaking the rear wheel loose, I teach them to combine the two. Braking traction to steer with the rear wheel using the rear brake is much more practical than using the throttle because you have more control over your momentum and your direction. The first thing a rider needs to understand is what determines the direction the rear wheel is going to go, the grade of the road and your influence. The second thing a rider needs to understand is target fixation. If your plan is to stop, focus on the point you want to stop at. If your plan is to continue to go, lift your eyes up before you make that stop. The third thing a rider needs to understand, the rear brake is ineffective at stopping in a skid turn because it's locked up. The front brake is the only way to stop in a skid turn. The proper technique for applying front brake is 1 or 2 fingers. Slight pressure until you stop. Don't stab and don't grab. Choosing a low traction environment and turn initiation are the same in a skid turn and a power slide. In a skid turn, the rider needs to keep their weight neutral and stomp on the rear brake. Stay on it all the way through the turn. Don't release the rear brake. If the rider lets up in the middle of the turn, the rear wheel can gain traction and it could cause a high side. The two places I like to do this in is on a flat ground 90-degree turn and down a hill 90-degree turn. Using the rear brake down a hill is very effective, probably the most effective place to steer with the rear. If you have to make a choice of going left or right at the bottom of a hill, if you hit your rear brake at the right time, the grade of the road will cause the rear wheel to lock up and slide in the direction you point the front wheel. Timing of the rear brake is critical. If a rider hits the brake too soon, they won't make the corner. If the rider hits the brake too late, they'll overshoot the corner. In a skid turn or a power slide, different tires will react differently.
I've got two very different tires here. If you look at the tread pattern of each of these, they're so different from each other, and their handling characteristics will also be super different when you're on the bike. So if you're going to do that power slide in the rear end, getting it around, a tire like this will break away later and will grab earlier. So your window of slide will be much narrower. And when this thing re-grabs the ground, all these little biting fingers of the tread lugs, they're going to grab and attack the ground. And that back end might feel a little bit unpredictable in terms of snapping back into that traction zone. This is a fun tire to ride, but a little more demanding. This is more of an advanced tire. Moving over to the street tire. When you get to the breakaway point on this tire, it's going to be quite a bit more forgiving. This tire will ease into that slide point, and then once you're in it, you'll have a more fluid, dynamic roll across the surface of the ground. And so this tire will break away earlier, and then it'll reconnect later. You'll have more fun sliding on this tire. It'll be a really great experience. But your straight line drive is going to be less than over here on this aggressive tire tread. And this tire will give you that more fluid experience as you're trying to do that slide. So if you're going to set up a bike just for the sole purpose of doing power sliding, this is the tire you get. Most guys, we're going to be riding somewhere in the middle, and that means that the slide characteristics of our tire are going to be somewhere balanced in between these two extreme points. And once you find the balance and breakaway point on your bike with your tires, you'll be sliding like a pro.
Now, I can't teach you this in a video. You gotta get the feel for it. The reason is there's so many variables. The weight of the bike, the power of the bike, how strong the rear brakes are, what does the terrain look like around you, how fast are you going, how sharp is your curve? All those variables matter. The key here is to start with a small turn in a safe environment.